You know, the one thing that you can't do, you can't drop your love for art. There are a lot of artists around the world right now that would just love to become a part of your life and style. HighEndPottery.com. That's HI-N-Pottery.com. They're sponsoring this show. They sponsor my entire podcast. They're taking the time to recognize the art that we do every day, and it's time that we recognize their art. Elevate your experience with art. All high-end products are one-of-a-kind functional art pieces. I have been inside their studios. I've watched their art come to life. To find out more, visit HighEndPottery.com, HI-N-Pottery.com, and tell them that Arrow sent you. And the reason why is because they're going to take care of the shipping and handling. HighEndPottery.com. Hey, it's Arrow, and this is Play It Forward. A look at the unexpected changes endured by the entertainers, writers, camera people, and all others affected but not infected by the global invasion of the coronavirus. These are real people, real stories, the struggle to play it forward. Episode 81, Science Futurist Rebecca D. Costa. Costa's landmark work has been heralded by global thought, innovation, and business leaders Richard Branson, John Sculley, E.O. Wilson, and Alan Dershowitz, to name a few. Now, according to Rebecca, climate change, tariff wars, terrorism, immigration, and nuclear disarmament remain unsolved because they're similar in nature. The real culprit is the absence of models for solving complex global problems wherein stakeholders have competing interests. Costa reveals how AIs and predictive analytics hold the key to solving dangerous systemic issues. Intelligent, humorous, and entertaining, Costa offers a unique scientific perspective on the headlines of the day, such as COVID-19. We are unplugged and totally uncut with Rebecca D. Costa. The radio listeners and things like that, when you hear a term called science futurist, what exactly does that mean so that we can get them on the same page?
Oh, that means, look, I don't talk to dead people or read tarot cards. I mean, I guess I should get that out of the way. I just simply look at data. We're amassing so much data. Literally, within a few months, we amass as much data as we did from the beginning of humankind to year 2020. And so it's not difficult to connect all of that data together using artificial intelligence and predictive algorithms to be able to make pretty accurate predictions on what comes next. So I don't think we need to guess anymore.
Well, then you probably saw this pandemic coming way before it actually arrived on our shores.
Well, it wasn't just me. I mean, we knew it was a matter of time, and we knew also that the warming of the earth, regardless of whether you think that humans are causing it or not, let's just put that aside for a moment. But in reality, we knew that a virus could potentially jump from an animal to a human. It's rare that happens. And it actually, even if a virus jumps from an animal to a human, it's even more rare that human can transmit that virus to another human without an animal intermediary. So fortunately for us, the way nature's designed, that's a rare occurrence. But when it happens, we just don't know enough about the human immune system, and we don't know enough about these viruses to be able to catch them and stop them. So they pose a tremendous threat. And I think anyone who's a scientist or a biologist has been long aware of this.
Now, did any of that research show that the American ego would put us back on this planet in the way of that we're in bigger trouble than what we were back in March?
Human behavior is hard to predict, but not impossible to predict. And, asking people that were designed to be social troop-dwelling organisms to self-isolate for any long period of time was not likely that was going to be very effective. We're in our DNA, we're designed to be with others. And that goes back to our roots in terms of survival. It was easier for us to defend against threats that were larger than any single individual by operating as a troop, as a pack. And so it's embedded deep in human DNA that when we see a threat, we come together. That's why all these movies where, a Martian is attacking the world, or a meteor is going to hit the earth, and suddenly all wars come to an end and we get it together.
That's such an interesting observation in the way that it's the truth, because, I mean, look at what we're doing. We are gathering in our neighborhoods. We are gathering at the grocery store. We don't have to have a conversation with you. We're still gathering. We need that human companionship.
We do. And that's why when you come up with strategies that are diametrically opposed with what our DNA informs us to do under large threats, it's not a really effective strategy, and it can't last for long. Even if our frontal cortex, which is the rational CEO of our brain, informs us to do a certain thing, we can only do it for a short amount of time if it's unnatural.
Being that science futurist, what are you guys investigating or searching right now in the way of, we got to get these kids back in class? Because, I mean, I cannot imagine the impact of this in 2, 3, 5 years from now.
Well, we just had a study come out literally of tens of thousands of COVID sufferers in the UK studied over the last 3 months. Remember, all of this data is real-time data, and we're just sifting through it right now. And we're discovering that if you're over the age of 80, you have a 20-time greater probability of dying of COVID than a 50-year-old. And if you're 50 years old, you have hundreds times more probability of dying than a 20-year-old. So we're, even though there is some risk, it is very, very low for 20 and below. And so I have to say that given the actual statistical risk and the way that the data is coming in and it's matching with other data, that under 20 years old are fairly safe. I don't think people should be waiting for a vaccine. And here is my reason why. We're very bad at vaccines. I'm sorry, but I wish I had better news. But we're not good at preventing you from getting a disease. We're good at keeping you from dying from it. In 1984, when AIDS was breaking out, and we thought if a mosquito bit someone with AIDS and bit another person, they would get it because we had about as much information about AIDS as we do right now about COVID. The Secretary of Health and Human Services of the United States said, hey, we're going to go on an all-out effort to make an AIDS vaccine. That was 36 years ago. We don't have an AIDS vaccine. No. But what we do have is we have methods to keep you from dying. You don't have to die of AIDS anymore. And in all the history of vaccines, we've only eliminated one disease that threatens human life of all the vaccine research, and that's smallpox. Every other disease exists somewhere on Earth, and we have not been able to eliminate, including polio and dengue fever, and name a disease, it's still out there. So I think this idea that if we couldn't do it in 36 years over something as important as AIDS, we're not going to have a vaccine. And if we do, I'm worried that it'll be 10-15% effective, and given all the mutations that are showing up now, we have up to 18 mutations that we've identified.
Wow. I mean, look at what happened with the swine flu when they thought that they had everything fixed there. People were dying. It was like, whoa, this was supposed to fix the swine flu.
Yeah, no, we are not good at keeping you from getting a disease. We never have been. And we're not going to suddenly get good at it. Science doesn't work that way. It's very inconvenient that we can't get answers when we need them.
Since we're on the subject of swine flu, way back there on page 2 and 3, I started reading stories about the swine flu is starting to break out in China right now, and there's other forms of bird flu. Are you onto those stories as well?
Yeah, and there's other viruses that move from animals to humans. This is not that unusual. The thing that makes COVID unusual is, one, it's deadly. 2, it's very easily transmitted. And 3, it transmitted from human to human where you don't get it from an animal. And, these things are they're very scary because those kinds of problems tend to exponentiate, and they move faster than we have the political wherewithal to stop them. We need kind of a better emergency system where we can act much more quickly to shut things down. Even though people might have thought that was extreme, I was already on the radio and urging members of Congress to shut the country completely down for 3 weeks. If we would have made it illegal to move at all, unless you were a healthcare worker, I think we would have put a stop to this, or at least seriously lowered the contagion levels. But it's becoming more and more obvious that we've reopened much too prematurely.
Don't you think that's because I'm here on the southeastern side of the country where we have hurricanes all the time, and my question is coming from, don't you think it's because we see these hurricanes coming, they come, they warn, and then it doesn't happen, and it's almost like the COVID-19 is that it was like, it's not going to happen, nothing happens, and then it did.
Well, what you're talking about is threat fatigue, right? If you keep running around like Chicken Little every day and saying the sky's going to fall, and we wake up and it's a sunny, bright day and go to the beach and nothing happens, well, yeah, people become, immunized to those kinds of warnings. And I do understand that. But that's part of leadership, right? Leadership can't be running around saying everything is coming to an end all the time. They have to be very selective in what they ask us to do in terms of taking action. And we have to understand that where hurricanes are concerned, our technology is getting better and better, not just incrementally, but exponentially. We're getting better and better at being able to track the routes of hurricanes. And so understand that these warnings are getting to be more discriminate and not as frequent and not as alarming as they previously were. We just launched the GOES satellites, a year ago, that are giving us, 20 times the resolution and 20 times the data that we ever had before. And you can imagine the impact on analytics, predictive analytics, when you get 20 times more data. So we can expect that those forecasts will get much, much better. As to people already being fatigued, now is not the time to be fatigued if the forecasts are becoming more accurate. So perhaps we need to, appeal to our frontal cortex and be logical and realize the warnings are actually getting better, not worse, and we maybe should pay more attention to warnings, not less. Speaking
of those forecasts, what does your research show on the COVID-19 affecting the financial gain and loss of this nation? Are we headed into a recession or a depression?
Well, I would, I'm not an economist, but, as a biologist, I would say we already had a pre-existing condition economically. That's the way I would put it. Look at what our debt structure was and look at the average household and how much debt that they had. When you start running surveys, national surveys, and you find that 80% of the population doesn't have $500 in their bank account in order to cover an emergency, you already have a pre-existing condition. So, it doesn't take much to topple the economy. I think Wall Street right now is completely out of step with the reality of the average citizen in the United States. And also they haven't come to terms quite with the kinds of additional debt that we're taking on by trying to keep the economy alive. But remember the old saying, if you're going to have a business plan, your short-term business plan should be to stay in business long enough to have a long-term business plan. So under an emergency, you've got to do what you've got to do. You've got to, give people money to spend. You've got to reopen certain segments. You've got to, you have to do things that you wouldn't do if the economy were thriving. But given that, there's a big price to pay, and I think we haven't quite come to terms with that.
So how come you're not in politics? How come you're not running for office? What's going on here? Because, your knowledge and your solution building and things like this, and it's like, wow, we want you. We want you.
Well, that's a very nice thing to say. I think possibly the worst kind of politician would be a scientist like myself. I wouldn't have any support from anybody in Congress because I don't really care whether people agree or disagree. If the facts are, stack up and they're empirically demonstrable and verifiable and reproducible, I just don't care what anybody says, and given that, the other thing is that I'll take a position, but if you bring data to me and prove I'm wrong, I abandon that position immediately. So talk about flip-flopping. I'd be killed.
Okay, how about a podcast? Are you podcasting? Because, I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge that people would sit there and jump on that show every day just to hear what you're willing to bring.
Well, you're very kind in your compliments, and I appreciate them very much. I don't happen to think I'm particularly smart, but then again, when you're a scientist, you quickly realize there's a lot more you don't know than you know. But no, I rely on venues like you have, to get my voice out and to get more accurate facts out. And people can certainly go to my website, and occasionally when I have time between research, I'll put, some valuable information. I'm basically apolitical, and we all know that you can't win a political election if you're apolitical.
Exactly.
So no reason for me to go down that road, and no reason for me to have a podcast when I can ride on the coattails of folks like you.
I love your attitude. You got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
Well, thank you for having me, and feel free to call on me anytime.
Excellent. You be brilliant this weekend, okay?
All right. You same for you.
That's Play It Forward. If you'd like to listen to other conversations like this, pick it up in 3 different spots. Like It's Live, Unplugged and Totally Uncut, and View from the Writing Instrument. All found on every digital platform.